I hope that you are ready because it is time to discuss Sunrise on the Reaping. Suzanne Collins really saw you all making first drafts of President Snow on TikTok and said, enough. She said, let me remind you why you all hated this man before he was hot, before he was Tom Blythe, okay? She said no one's getting out alive. And then she sat down, wrote this book, and consequently destroyed all of our lives. Everybody say thank you, Suzanne. So this book came out on Tuesday the 18th of March. I read it in 2 days and I have not been able to stop thinking about it since. This is the only book that I've ever read and tabbed. I'd never understood why people did this before. I thought it was really cool. I wasn't to be one of those people that did. I never felt the need to do it until this book. I started reading it. I started taking pictures of pages that I thought I wanted to come back to, and then by the time I was kind of taking a picture of every single page, I thought, wait, let me tab it. I would just like to say now, straight off the bat, if I see one more edit of Haymitch or any of these characters in this book to a song from Hamilton, count your days. Your days are numbered. Destroying my life. I've already read the book. Okay, I've already been destroyed emotionally. I don't need any further ammunition against me, but also don't stop. Hello everybody, welcome back or welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be discussing, of course, Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, the newest book in the Hunger Games series. If you are completely unfamiliar with the Hunger Games and know nothing about it, essentially we've been given a book that we've wanted as a fandom for over a decade, and we don't know how to be chill about it. I haven't known how to be chill about this since it was announced last year. In the Hunger Games series, we of course have the main trilogy, The Hunger Games, Catching Fire and Mockingjay. It follows our protagonists, Katniss and Peeta, throughout the 74th annual Hunger Games. Set in a dystopian future where America is now known as Panem and it is ruled over by the Capitol, who every year force 2 tributes from each of the 12 districts, 1 boy and 1 girl, children from the ages of 12 to 18, to fight to the death in an arena as punishment for their rebellion 74 years ago. Before we had Sunrise on the Reaping, Suzanne also wrote The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which was a prequel to the Hunger Games, much like this one, which follows the story of Coriolanus Snow, who we of course see subsequently as the President of Panem. Flash forward to Sunrise on the Reaping, which is the second quarter quell, the 50th Hunger Games, and in this quell, there is double the amount of tributes required to be entered into the arena. 4 from each district, 48 tributes in total. Haymitch Abernathy is at the centre of our narrative. We all know and love Haymitch from the original trilogy. He is Katniss and Peeta's mentor. He is the only surviving victor of District 12 thus far. And when we see Haymitch in the Hunger Games, he is always drunk, he is very unhappy, he doesn't have any hope, and he doesn't seem to care at all about the fate of the tributes that he is supposed to be mentoring. Because nobody really bets on anybody from District 12. District 12 is kind of the lost cause. So why would Haymitch want to get close to these 2 children who he's essentially sending to an early grave? To me, it still doesn't actually feel real that I have this book in my hand. I have Haymitch's story. I wanted this for so long and I've now read it, which is even more crazy to me. So many people saying this about Sunrise on the Reaping, and I agree wholeheartedly that it is the missing piece of the puzzle, and the amount of information that we now have from this book makes so much sense, fleshes out so much missing information from the main series and from the prequel that we didn't have. We had to infer, but now we know as canon. Suzanne Collins has famously said that she won't write a book unless she thinks that she has something to say. I would say very obviously off the bat that this is a stark reminder of the propaganda that is fed to us in the Western world and our complicity and silence in the things that are going on in the rest of the world that we are just turning a blind eye to. This is exactly what we see in this book, perhaps more than ever. This book hit me so hard that I have actually booked a holiday to Vienna this week to escape. I needed to get away, I needed some headspace, I needed to be happy. I'm talking about the book quite generally here, but I will be talking about it in great depth, which does mean spoilers, so I will give you a warning when that's about to happen. But one thing I will say about this book, I think a lot of people will be asking the question, do I have to have read The Hunger Games? Do I have to have read Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes before reading this? And whilst it's not essential, I personally think that yes, you do, because you would take so much more from the plot, from the characters, from what happens, and you'll pick up on so much more of the nuances that Suzanne Collins has put in this book if you are familiar with those stories and those characters. So if you ask me, I would tell you yes. But it's not, as I say, completely essential. I think you can still follow the story and know what's happening without having read the series and the prequel. I really wish that somebody was taking note of how many times I audibly gasped when I was reading this book, because that is information that I'd be very interested to know. As I said, I was tabbing, I've taken notes, I'm ready to discuss, I'm ready to revert back to my uni student days. I will probably have missed something. I will probably just be rambling and miss loads of important things, but this is just like top line, top notes, first thoughts, feelings and discussions I wanted to have after I finished Sunrise on the Reaping. And yeah, I needed to get it all out of my system. I needed to talk to it about someone, and that's you. So yeah, come along for the ride and let's talk about Sunrise on the Reaping. If you don't want to be spoiled, I recommend pausing this video, going reading the book, and then coming back and watching, because I will be spoiling it for you. This is your last warning. If you haven't read the book, stop watching now. Don't say I didn't warn you. Let's get on with the spoilers. To begin, I want to start by reading a quote from page 5 of Sunrise on the Reaping, which I think perfectly encaptures haymitch's story and everything that we know we're about to witness from this quote. From reading this, we know it's going to go horribly wrong, to the point where this man loses everything about himself and everyone he's ever loved. And it goes like this. I have to agree, and though I'm not a drinker myself, I'm glad to get the bottle. The end. We could honestly take that quote and write an entire essay on Haymitch Abernathy from that alone. Understand his character and everything that that man goes through from that quote alone. Suzanne really likes to hurt us as much as she possibly can, and that was an instant slap in the face and set the precedent for the rest of the book. The thing that I really noticed reading Sunrise on the Reaping was how many parallels there are to Katniss and Haymitch, which of course there was always going to be. Even how each book opens on the morning of the Reaping. They are both with their younger siblings, they have both lost their father, and they both feel an overwhelming urgency and responsibility to protect their family. Now, I had hoped and I had thought and predicted that we were going to get a few Easter eggs in this book, but Suzanne was giving him out freely. I'm pretty confident that people are going to argue that that was just fan service and that was giving in to what we wanted and what we wanted to see in District 12, all the names that we were so familiar with and we were pining after. We've always wanted to know who Katniss's mum and dad are and how all of these relationships work. But I think that the reason that we know so much from this book is because Suzanne wants to show us how small and close-knit District 12 really is, and how every year it's not just a case of a stranger's children being chosen to go and fight to the death. It is a community, everybody knows one another. You are never more than one person away from death and from tragedy. It of course affects the entire district and everybody in it, because this loss could happen to any one of them, and it's a reminder of the generational pain that the games causes, something that none of these people in these districts will ever be able to escape. Or so they think. As soon as we are introduced to Astrid March, who's arranging bottles on a counter with a large blonde braid falling down her back, I think we know. Something that makes you feel absolutely physically sick is that Katniss is Haymitch's best friend's daughter. Like, what do you mean? He knows Katniss's mum and Katniss's dad so well. He has grown up these people, these are his classmates. He loves them. He has to push them away and he has to make them hate him as much as he hates himself. But then he's given the responsibility of mentoring his best friend's daughter to what he thinks is her death. That makes me feel sick. Actually sick. Burdock, I love you so much. It's even more painful reading this book through the lens of what we already know is going to come and what is going to happen. Looking at these two stories side by side, taking things from each other and just feeling this immense pain and immense sadness, because that's what Suzanne loves to do and that's what she does best. She hurts us. I also think in the Hunger Games we kind of have this not so flattering view on Katniss's mum, who doesn't really speak, doesn't really seem to provide for her children and doesn't seem to care about Katniss. I think that's fair to say. I think like she doesn't care about her daughters. In this book we see her humanized, we see trauma that she's had to go through, we see her falling in love, we see her with the love of her life, and we know that she loses that man. We see her lose her best friend in a very, very traumatic way. She's a victim of the Capitol, both in the ways of taking her loved ones from her brutally in the Hunger Games, and also a victim of the Capitol taking her loved ones from her brutally in an act of service to the Capitol as well, an explosion in the mines. And I think when we take a backseat we can see Astrid and we can see Burdock's story, I think that allows us to have a little bit more empathy to Astrid and have a little bit more forgiveness for her. And of course it's so much more complex than just calling her a bad mum. I really enjoyed that perspective in this book, and I wasn't expecting for Suzanne, as I said, to give it to us so freely, a way that really worked. Of course, we are also given an insight into Otho Malark, Peter's father, whose folks own the bakery. And again, like I was saying before, it just highlights the monotony of life in District 12. The inability to escape the roles assigned to you at birth. The poorest district in Panem, of course, we know from the Hunger Games that Peter is a baker. You know, he has been assigned that role from birth. Of course, his whole family business is the bakery. The capital control everything about these people's lives. There is maybe an illusion of freedom when haymitch goes and sees his love outside of District 12, but that, of course, is cut short and isn't the case. There is no escaping the strict and harsh rule of the capital, and I think Suzanne shows us that very well in just the opening scenes and the reaping scenes in this book. I think all of that coincides very nicely with something that Maisley says a bit further on in the book on page 82. Haymitch says to her, "You could reject their business." Maisley then replies, "I couldn't. I was going to spend the rest of my life behind that county counter, no matter how much I hated it. And I'm guessing you have been wearing miner's overalls to your grave. We never, none of us, had any choices." So true, bestie. Again, I say now, Maisley Donna, potentially one of my favourite characters in the entire series of the Hunger Games. Said it, mic drop. Moving on to more of the reaping scene and more of the things that we see from the capital in this book. I think one of the things to really keep an eye on, and that really interested me in particular, was the capital's and the people that worked for the Hunger Games' attitude towards the tributes. There are some instances in this book where Haymitch refers to himself and his fellow tributes as nothing more than animals for the capital's entertainment. Drusilla, who is Effie's predecessor, seems to absolutely hate the tributes, have no sympathy, remorse towards them at all, literally views them and refers to them as district pigs. I know we get an insight into Effie in this book as well, but I think when we look at her and her attitude in the Hunger Games, she's so much more, I would say, caring about her tributes. She definitely has a different view of them to Drusilla. There's an interview with Suzanne at the end of this copy of the book, and she touches on this and talks about the generational difference with how these people view the games. Drusilla, who has lived through the dark days, has viewed the games as a way to get revenge on these children and on the districts, whereas Effie has more embraced the games as her patriotic duty and something that she can use to better herself and to better her career. I, of course, love Effie as a character, and I think when we see her in the 74th game, she's still kind of fighting to believe this propaganda that the games is good. But as the years goes on, that's obviously harder and harder for her to do, which is ultimately how she ends up as part of the rebellion, whether she was willing to join or not in the first place. We'll talk more about the tributes and the other characters later, but Maisley, you always be favoured. And can I say, the scene where she slaps Maisley and Maisley slaps her right back, but maybe my favourite in this entire book. An example of Drusilla's desire for revenge and to punish the tributes is when she says to Maisley, "I hope you do win. You have no idea what's in store for you then. You know nothing." She is gleefully boasting to a girl about to be sent to her death that even if she does win against these odds and come out of this alive, she's definitely not won and the horrors won't end for her there. And she's just to take great pride in the fact that these children are going to suffer at the hands of her and her fellows in the capital. Something else I really enjoyed about the capital's attitude is a scene where someone nearly offers the tributes a glass of champagne and he says, "Whoops, none for the children." As in, they can't have champagne, they couldn't possibly have any bubbles. They're children, but we can strip them away from their families, put weapons into their hands, and train them to kill each other in the most brutal and barbaric way possible, because that makes complete sense. Another very disturbing incident of the capital is when they try to infantilize the children even further. Of course they are children, but they try to make them younger. Haymitch sees the career districts again after their makeup. He knows some of those careers had full beards earlier, but they look younger and less scary clean shaven. Losing the chest hair didn't hurt either. Now, why would the capital want the children to look even more younger and prepubescent than they already do? That's so messed up. It shows to us how much of a spectacle it is. They're trying to evoke as much horror from the capital as they possibly can. They don't want them looking like adults, and they want the district to see how much power they have over them and how they can just take their children whenever they want and use them however they will. Nothing more than toys, props, models for the capital to shape at their will. As Haymitch says many times in this book, they are painting their posters. Children are gonna die. The capital are gonna pretend to be horrified, but they love it. They think this is their God-given right to watch children being slaughtered. At the end of the day, have no remorse. They might pretend to, they might support their tributes, they might send their gifts in the arena, but at the end of the day, they aren't human to them. They aren't human. They are dolls. Something I mentioned at the start of this video was the many parallels between Katniss and Haymitch in this book. Another way we can look at this is during the reaping, of course. Neither Katniss nor Haymitch's names are initially pulled from the reaping bowl. They are not the chosen tributes. By way of unfortunate circumstances, Katniss's sister is reaped. She steps in and volunteers. The boy that's supposed to be chosen tries to run away and is subsequently killed. The only reason Haymitch is then involved in the games is because he sees his love, Lenore Dove, in an altercation and rushes to help her, rushes to save the person he loves, exactly like Katniss did. He's of course then chosen, there's nothing he can do about it, and he just kind of resigns and accepts his fate, vows to kind of be the protector of District 12 tributes, especially Luella, his sweetheart. And I know this will have escaped absolutely none of us, the way that he calls Luella sweetheart and the way that he then calls Katniss sweetheart. Haymitch says of Luella that she is his one and only sweetheart, and also refers to her as being one of the spunkiest 13-year-olds you had ever seen. I think in this instance we can then look at the way Haymitch calls Katniss sweetheart and know and understand now that it was never in a patronizing or sarcastic way. That nickname to him genuinely had such a profound meaning and connection and sentimentality, actually. I see that was a very intimate thing for him to call Katniss, and I know that he refers a bit to that in his epilogue. Tough and smart, her hair in 2 braids then, reminding me for all the world of Luella McCoy, my sweetheart of old. Just hit after hit. What happens to Luella is potentially one of the most disturbing in the book. She of course dies brutally during the chariot fiasco, and then to punish Haymitch and also to get the games as good as they can be to him, he then takes a random girl from District 11 and makes her into the new Luella. You don't think Snow can get any worse or come up with anything more barbaric, and then he just pulls something like that. He just proves you wrong every time. I think this was Suzanne's way of saying, don't forget how disgusting and horrible this man is. I think with Lulu and with Rue, there is obviously parallels there, especially after their deaths in the arena, where they are both laying down in a field of wildflowers. And of course Katniss blames herself for Rue's death just as much as Haymitch blames himself for Lulu's. And that anger and that devastation fuels each of the characters on to ultimately win the games. Let's talk about the other District 12 tributes. Of course, left we have Maisley and we have Wyatt. Wyatt is the son of a better boy. They take bets on who's going to survive the games in the districts, and Haymitch is very disturbed by this, and they kind of have this outsider look on him at the beginning until they realise he is also just a victim of the Capitol and does what he can and any means that he can take to survive. I think it's a very important thing to note that Wyatt is all about numbers, he's all about odds, and ultimately that is what he becomes, like all of the other tributes, just another number, just another statistic. Basically, no one in the Capitol is going to remember any of these tributes apart from their victor. Certainly not anyone from the mass death that takes part in the bloodbath at the cornucopia, which Wyatt is obviously a victim to, trying to protect Lulu, which is of course absolutely devastating. There's a scene before they all go into the arena, they all give each other a hug, they're also all sleeping in the same room, looking out for each other, keeping watch, holding hands. That was one of the most devastating scenes in the book, I think. We also find out at the end of the book that Wyatt's father takes his own life, which is absolutely devastating. We are warned at the start of the Sunrise and the Reaping what happens in the aftermath of the game. Haymitch talks us through that, people turning to drink, people turning to suicide, people just completely losing themselves, and I think with a lot of characters, Haymitch included, we see that come to fruition. I think Wyatt was truly devastating. When Haymitch sees his face projected in the sky, he doesn't expect to have the reaction that he does. Of course, the other tribute from District 12 is Maisley. I've spoken about Maisley a lot already. I don't think I'm surprised that she is probably my favourite character in this book. I think it's in Catching Fire, maybe, when Katniss's mum talks about how she had a friend that went into the games and her name was Maisley Donna. And it says, I don't think mum has spoken about her much in the past because then she'd have to talk about the way she died. And obviously we know the way she died and we know why she died like that, but I don't think Haymitch has told anybody about it because the way he pushes everyone away, he's too scared to talk to anybody, he's too scared to be friends with anybody, that we don't necessarily know what they know about his games. All we know is what they've seen via what he sees. The director's cut of his games. Maisie has so much anger and she has so much rage, and I loved seeing that in this book, but that's how I would feel. She's not scared to show her emotions. Her rage reminded me of Joanna's in Catching Fire. We of course know that Maisie is the original owner of the Mockingjay pin. We know that Madge is her niece. We find out in this book she didn't really think much of the Mockingjay pin. She told Haymitch, and she was desperate for him to end the games and to start this revolution and to punish the capital. I think if she knew that the silly little pin that she didn't have much love or care much about turned into the symbol of the rebellion, I think she'd love that. And I love that that happens, and I love that she is part of it in her own way, and her story continues and her legacy continues. And I love this little quote Suzanne puts in where Maisie says, "Well, either I escape the capital and survive, maybe I'll give that pin a second chance." The bonus points to Maisie for just taking any chance she could to insult people, especially those from the capital. Just loved her. Speaking of favourite characters, I let out the biggest squeal, I think, known to man when we are introduced to Haymitch's mentors in the games. Of course, Wirus and Mags. And when we see Wirus and Mags, they seem to be very sane. Wirus is able to talk in full sentences, she makes sense, she's very smart, and Mags speaks and offers numerous amounts of guidance and support to our tributes. I think the description of Wirus's games is so interesting. I think it's really, really cool. Essentially covered in mirrors and reflective surfaces, and to win the games she just hid the whole time. As I was reading Haymitch have any interactions with Wirus, Mags and BT, I was just getting flash forwards to Catching Fire when Katniss is saying that she wants these people as their allies, and how Haymitch must have felt hearing that from her. Like I said, it's so strange now having this lens and this backstory and this information going forward and looking at certain scenes in the Hunger Games series, because we have so much more information. It's going to take me a while to get around it. I'm going to have so much more to say than I do in this video. BT, I wasn't expecting to be so traumatized by BT's story. His son Amper has been reaped for the 50th Hunger Games as punishment to BT. And BT knows this, Amper knows this, Haymitch knows this, everybody knows this. That doesn't take away from how horrific it really is. Amper is also the leader of the Newcomers Alliance. Him and Haymitch have plans, courtesy of BT, to kind of try and take down the arena from the inside and use that knowledge to end the Hunger Games. And I guess that is another reason why BT is so involved in the rebellion where we see him in Catching Fire and Mockingjay. He has so much motive, and to lose Amper in the way that we do is just awful, and nothing is left but his bones. He thought they couldn't take anything else away from BT. Taking away his son's body was something else that Snow could have done, and he did it. That was a very hard scene to read, and watching the capital completely devour his son and strip him out of the world. There's so much to say about so many things. I need to go and read the trilogy again, because I think I'd take so much more from it. My brain cannot handle it at the minute. I hate the fact that I'm probably missing out on so much, but I love the fact that I'm picking up on so much, having not read the books for quite a while. Plutarch Heavensby. Where do we start with this man? I thought his character in this was extremely important to see, because it shows us as readers that the rebellion didn't just happen on the off chance that Katniss Everdeen refused to eat the nightlock berries and overnight the world changed. This rebellion has been in the works and has been set in motion since before the 50th Hunger Games. We don't see this rebellion actually take shape and commence until 15 years later, and that is so realistic and so important for us to see as readers. Although Katniss was the face of the rebellion, there was so many more people at play and at stake that ultimately made this happen. There was so much that happened to contribute to its ending. It wasn't just Katniss and it wasn't just Peter's story. It was everyone that came before them. It was Maisie's, it was Haymitch's, it was BT, Wirus, Mags, Plutarch, Finnick, all of the above. And I think that's why the symbolism of Haymitch's flint striker, obviously gifted to him by his love, signified the flint, the spark that kind of starts the rebellion. That's where we obviously join as readers to begin with, but this is the backstory, and this proves to us they didn't happen out of nowhere. But it does make you wonder, for a man as clever and as tuned in to everybody as Snow is, how he didn't see Plutarch here. Why this man was able to continue the rebellion. If I'm missing something very crucial, please let me know, because that was what's really interested me. Like, why wasn't he punished? Why did no one notice what he was actually doing? Speaking of Snow, Oh my, I've never known someone hold such a grudge. It was actually embarrassing to read about this man. Not over something that happened 40 years ago. Like, get over it. A man scorned, eh? There were so many references to Lucy Gray in this book. Loved it. And I think my favourite part and my favourite reference, well, which I've taken to be a reference anyway, let me know what you think, is this. And bear with me here because I will explain what I mean. There's a moment when Haymitch is having like an inner monologue about Lenore Dove and the Covey and how he was unnerved that Snow seemed to know so much about this and about District 12. And he's glad that the gift that he thought Snow had for him wasn't Lenore Dove. She says he was glad it wasn't though. She's much safer in that ghastly wilderness around 12. And I read that and I thought, is this Suzanne Collins trying to tell us that Lucy Gray is indeed safe in the ghastly wilderness around District 12? I'm taking that as the truth. I'm taking that as Lucy Gray is living a happy life out in the woods. She comes and visits Lenore Dove and that sometimes. That's why they don't really want to talk about her because they don't want to get in trouble. But she's still alive and she's still well and she's surviving. And yeah, don't argue with me, okay? Because that's now canon. It's obviously very unnerving to Haymitch when Snow is talking very in depth about District 12 and the Hob and the naming conventions of the Covey. He's obviously very familiar with this. We know why, but Haymitch doesn't know why. It's just another reminder of how much Snow is actually in control. And there was never a second that he wasn't. And that's something that we always need to remember. I think Snow is so embarrassed about what happened to him and the whole Lucy Gray fiasco that he's of course determined to take that out on everybody else, especially those in District 12. Haymitch even notes that after the 10th Hunger Games, the games drastically changed and altered. And he says, from this point on, the games evolved from pure punishment to unapologetic entertainment. He wanted to punish these people in any way possible and make even more of a spectacle of them and have even more people see this. And he wanted to make sure the capital knew and the districts knew that the games weren't going anywhere. Despite what happened with Lucy Gray, that was the last time this man was going to show any weakness. But by showing that weakness, and by feeling that weakness and seeing himself being that weak, he was then able to see and exploit other people's weakness and build that up into his ghastly game, which of course is the embodiment of his character. He's simply just an awful person. And even though I knew he didn't meet his demise until Mockingjay, I still wished it had happened in this book instead. One thing I did love though was when Haymitch got to watch Lucy Gray on TV and he sees our girl in rainbow ruffles singing. And just like that, because he's clever and because he's Haymitch, everything makes sense to him and everything falls in place and he finally understands who this girl is. Now, we of course can't talk about the Hunger Games, we can't talk about Sunrise and the Reaping or the 50th Quell without talking about the arena. I won't lie, I think the arena was my least favourite part of the book, but there are obviously some really interesting parts of the arena that I want to talk about and discuss. The whole thing just feels so helpless because you know Amper and Haymitch have these grand plans to take down the arena from the inside and it all sounds so great and thought out and well planned, but we obviously know that nothing happens. All we know is that Haymitch uses the arena as a weapon to win and then he's punished for it, but we don't know the extent to the punishment and if that was all that he was punished for. And of course reading this, we know that it wasn't. There was parts I had to read several times to really grasp what was happening. It all happened very quickly. And of course, although he was semi-successful, he wasn't. It was crazy, and when we find out that the arena is actually shaped after an eye, the only thing I could think of was Big Brother, and of course the capital Big Brother, semi the same thing. And another message and reiteration on the fact that the capital is always watching and they know everything. So all of these plans and all of this stuff that Haymitch was trying to do was, to what he thinks, is fruitless. Something that really shocked me in the arena was the appearance of the random game makers who were trying to patch up or like set something up in the arena. That was a very tense scene, very uncanny scene where there's 4 tributes all trying to like escape slash attack each other, and then they come on into the clearing and see these game makers and something clocks in them. They're like, oh wait, no, these, remember who the real enemy is, remember who the enemy is. Both game makers are then killed by the tributes and then they pay for those deaths ultimately not very long after, which leaves Haymitch and 2 others left in the arena, Welly and Silka. There's a really emotional scene in the arena. I mean, there's a lot of emotional scenes in the arena, but there's one that's extremely poignant, and when I was reading it I was like, wow, okay, that's hit me hard. It's the scene where Haymitch has found Welly. They're up in a tree, they've been sent a gift by their sponsors, they're eating some chocolate, trying to stay alive. Haymitch then becomes aware of somebody crying. He looks down and Silka's resting up against the trees sobbing. the last 3 people in the arena all around the exact same tree. Rare moment of district unity in the games. And then haymitch drops some of the chocolate gifts down the tree to Silka, who then eats them. I was like, wow, that is an incredibly powerful moment in the story. It's incredibly touching, but it's also very painful to read, especially knowing what's coming next, which is of course haymitch's victory. Of course, we all then know what happens next. Haymitch throws his axe across the arena, it rebounds, kills Silka, and marks him victor, although he has been fatally wounded before this happens. He's of course fiddling, trying to cause an explosive. The game makers are shouting at him like they did at Katniss to try to stop her and to have their victor, which both haymitch and Katniss seem extremely reluctant to allow to happen. The capital always gets their way. Haymitch wakes up after thinking he has finally escaped into the same place that he was before he was taken to the games. In a very full circle and harrowing moment, he wakes up and realizes that nothing has changed. He's just completely alone, and that without all the people he's come to care about. Of course, we know that his suffering hasn't ended, and that when he goes home, it's only going to get worse. We have an agonizing few weeks where haymitch is forced to parade around the capital, knowing deep down that something isn't right, and then he has to play up to what they want from him to kind of spare the ones he loves at home in a last-ditch attempt. I was crying probably from this point on to the end of the book. Epilogue just completely wiped me out, and when he gets home, he sees his house up in flames, everyone's standing around, there's nothing they can do. It's all very extremely sad, and when the climax happens, he finally reunites with Lenore Dove, which was what we've been hoping for throughout the entire book. Obviously, no, we know that no happy ending there, but we're still hopeful that Suzanne might have admitted something and not told us something. But of course, she dies, and it's even more horrible and even more heartbreaking because she dies in his arms, and he blames himself for that as well, subsequently forcing him to push absolutely everybody away that has ever loved or known him. There's a really heartbreaking scene where Burdock and Astrid, Katniss's parents, are the only 2 left that are trying to get through to him, but the only way that he thinks he's protecting them is to physically harm Astrid, and that's what causes eventually their eventual fallout. And knowing that, and knowing the next time that haymitch forms a connection with somebody with meaning is his daughter, that adds a whole new layer of hurt to that. And obviously we see haymitch turn to the drink, fall down into this spiral, which is where we find him at the start of the Hunger Games. Yep, so much my camera died. Where was I? We always knew it would be, but it is just so incredibly sad, incredibly heartbreaking. And then to top it all off, Suzanne writes us a 2-page epilogue. I was in so much pain. You have a clip of me reading the last few pages of this book, and I'm an absolute mess. Distraught. I certainly hoped, but I didn't think we were going to get an epilogue. I certainly didn't think we were going to get to see flashes of Katniss and of Peter. Now looking back, I think it was so important that we did, and they are equally both so important to haymitch's story and haymitch's character arc and what happens to him and where he ends up. But knowing what we do now, and knowing that when he first sees Katniss, she is a baby and it's his best friend's baby, that hits even harder. And after all these years, he's held on to this promise and this love that he had for this girl 15 years ago. Oh, making me emotional even thinking about it now. But haymitch Abernathy, I love you like all fire, and this book to me was incredible. It was all that I could have wished for and more. So thank you, Suzanne, for finally giving us this missing piece of such a complex puzzle. I'm completely emotionally devastated by reading this book, and yeah, I just had to come on and I had to talk about it. I had to share my thoughts with all of you. And equally, if there's anything that I've missed, is there anything that you thought was even more important that I haven't spoken about, or if you just want to generally talk about the book with me, please do so. I would love to read all of your thoughts, all of your comments, all of your theories. If you watched it this far through, then thank you so much for joining me to yap about one of my favourite book series of all time with this new edition, Sunrise and the Reaping. Please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and I hope to see you all again very, very soon. Okay, bye.